All right. Hello. So, man, I really need to find an intro. Um, yeah, I'm gonna be going through some of the stuff that I've been working on. And so, if anyone has questions about particular content, now would be a good time. Hey, hello. Um, because I know, right, some of you would have been in like the F-Zero Mods channel. Um, So I can kind of show what that is. And I did do like a fresh import on really all of the stage data. If you have a particular map that you like, we can always go and poke around in that. And I'm sure that'll lead to some kind of discussion. Um, but yeah, really a lot of my day today has just been poking around in this thing. Um, this is I don't know if it's really organized well, but um, here, let's sort this up a bit. Yeah, I need to distinguish a few things, but basically, this is, yeah, this would be all of the, so for each track in the game, each like segment of the track has like a data set associated with that. And that data set is basically this thing. So for instance, we got some AX stages in here. Um, so basically for stage 0, right? So this is screw drive, but like the Sand Ocean version of that. This is all of the data that defines how different segments of the track function. Um, and so there's still a lot of stuff I'm figuring out. Um, but within that, um, there's a bunch of stuff going on. But within that, we have things like the scale of the track and some of these other properties. And it's actually the stuff right here that is like the rail. So it's these two values. That's the rail on the right. That's the rail on the left. Right. So again, you can like sort largest to smallest. You can kind of see that stuff from like, right. So for town air dive, right? So a height of 23 on the right and a height of 3 on the left. So already. Hey, Pupper. All right, one moment. So, I guess in the future, I just realized I like opened up something and now I'm hearing myself. Um, yeah, exciting finds. In the future, maybe I'll try and tone down the bit rate. Feel bad. Um, but yeah, so that's, I mean, yeah, that's a fun find. But there's some like other stuff that's kind of weird. There's like these two unused values, which it's always one of those things of like, we could always try and throw data into the game and see what happens, but that's kind of hard to figure out what it is. Um, it's more like we would have to see what the game code's actually doing for that, but that's kind of nice. So we can like hide that. Um, there's still some stuff to figure out. Like there's these seemingly random values, and there's a lot of different things. What's nice about Accelerate is it can actually tell you stuff. So for instance, Like these are all of the different values it can be. So it's, I mean, it's clearly an integer, just don't know what exactly for what. Have to look into the pattern at some point because it does kind of look like it would be, oh, maybe it's two shorts. Huh, maybe I should do that. Actually, let me do that right now. Um, um, yeah, that's always always something when you're like talking it out and then you start thinking of things. Um, but yeah, so there's all this stuff. There's a couple unknown things. What's nice is I did figure out some stuff, such as here. Let me go see if I can show. So basically, at the end of the day, like all that stuff in the spreadsheet is this stuff here. And so for each one of these things, right, we can kind of start breaking down what they're supposed to be. And right, so this one's kind of nice. This is something I figured out. So there's like two flags that indicates if it has a rail on the right or on the left. And it's consistent with like all of the data across AX and GX. So we know that like that's actually what that is, right? So the annoying thing too, right, is like we can figure out what a value is in the data, and there's also like metadata about that data stored elsewhere. And if those things don't line up, then it's like we could do something, and then because half the data is there, the game wouldn't actually interpret it. But anyway, yeah, so I could actually split these two things up, and then when I go and generate, oh geez, and then when we go and generate file, we can actually add that to the list of things that it keeps an eye for. All right, we added this. And this. So there's a lot of like garbage code like this. That's like a lot of copy paste, but does the job. Go to Unity. Yeah, so one of the most annoying things is really just waiting for things to like recompile, because sometimes it takes like a minute. I regenerated all of the stages, and that takes like 15 minutes. So there's a lot of downtime. Yeah, but basically, I guess one thing I could show off is, yeah, so I have some code, and my dog is, well, running off to go bark at a dog downstairs. But within, so the way it works, I guess that's really what I should be explaining here. The way this stuff works is I write some scripts, right? So I write some code like here. One thing I do is I write like what the actual data structure is. And then I write some code that says, take in all of those values and write them to a spreadsheet. And then when I'm here, I like, there's this other infrastructure that I'm not going to talk about, but you can like go and create like this kind of thing that you can go and add, and then it does certain things. One of those is like analysis stuff. So I can basically say, go and analyze these parts of a specific file. And I can actually say like, what are those files? And then I can click on a button, and then and then a window shows up, and then it shows me the file that I just generated, which will be something like this. And then every time I do this, I have to go and make it a table. But once I have this, then things get pretty easy in the sense that, I can look like, hey, there you go, right? Like I already figured out in just splitting that up that like the lower, the lower half of that value isn't actually anything. And it turns out that it's just this upper half that actually has some values in it. Never mind. Actually, I bet I forgot to load in the data. Oh no. Oh, but I didn't reload the data. Yeah. So it's a lot of that. Um, let's see. So for instance, let's do this one. So that's something I forget too, is every time I change something, I have to like reparse all of the files. And so I have to let it go off and do its thing. But this is like way, way easier than what it was doing just a few years ago. And then AX is quite large. So all right. So once that happens, have a look again. Okay, yeah, never mind. There's data in both. Yeah, so it's hard to say. It does kind of look like these are just a bunch of flags. Hmm. These ones are way more consistent. Hmm. Well, in any case, that was from today. I'm curious, I might just go off, wander, and find something to talk about, but is there any stage in particular that you like and want to dig into? Guess while that's coming out. Yeah, and one thing to note is like all of these all of these files or scripts, these are all of the different data types that I currently know are in the the scene file. So if anyone was wondering why that takes forever, it is in particular because of that. There's just so many different parts to it. Yeah, I guess one thing too, if anyone has an idea, so this is one of the things that I'm currently working on, is there's a series of volumes that presumably, right, like when the player's inside of this, right, like it's it's doing something. I actually built a different version of that, so we can actually inspect like the individual ones. Right? And so, we can get an idea that like when you're, interesting. And actually, the end of the heel clips. So is there something that happens? Presumably we could actually test like if you're in here and then not. See what happens, but um, yeah, there's anyway, there's a number of these volumes. And we know that when the vehicle is inside the volume, it does something. We're just not certain what that something is. Like for instance, when you go up this ramp, what is this for? And also this seems pretty strange, right? Like you'd think it would be something like this. Right, because this makes more sense. That you'd be like in it on the way up, but let's see. I think I'll do that again. There seems to be an order to this. Almost. During the jump. The one thing I wish the debug menu had was like, when you can just like move a character, but like they don't have gravity being applied or anything. I feel like that would be really useful. Oh, actually, that gives me a thought. In F0AX, do we have these triggers for the test stages? Yeah, let's check like 101. Don't save. No. Just have the surface. That's super weird too. There's like, yeah, class 2, class 5. Some kind of don't display this thing guardrail. Huh. Wonder what the FC stands for, actually. So let's do something quickly. Cool. Well, that's interesting. Already the names of these things are more like what's in there. Oof, no, that's let's see. Well, it's better. FC. FC. Yeah, like I've derailed a bit, but yeah, so the idea being that well, like if we look at what we're trying to do, right? Let's go to a more modern stage. I guess a bit. Yeah. So right, like part of what we want to do is recreate, not necessarily to recreate, but right, like if we look at the geometry, it's built in a very specific way. And if we look at like checkpoints, right, like we can see that there's like a central path, right? And around that, it's kind of building up a volume. But like, again, in a way that's kind of more dynamic. And the best way to kind of figure out, right, like going back to this stuff, sometimes the best way to figure out what like this other data could be is by knowing what the tool is and what the tool can do. So this might be something for me to like read at a later date. Because this kind of would have been it. But the question is like this, but this is like Maya from 2009. The idea would be to go and look at like Maya from like 2001. Because the older the version, the more accurate it'll be to what they actually had to do. Right, so they have removing a curve to create a surface. Let's just see if it's right. Yeah, okay. Create a profile curve. CV. Right, and part of it that I'm trying to figure out is like, is there a naming of this stuff that matches, you know, some of the older things? Right, because we have like things like no colliders and let recover, don't display this thing. But we have like FC and NZ. And right, like those correlate with, at least for the most part, parts of the track. So if we can figure out what like the FC and the NZ stand for, right, like it doesn't actually have to be from a tool, but this stuff does look like it's generated from a tool more than not. Right, and then because they have stuff like that, right? Like CV, like the, I guess, curve tool. Curve. Right, but yeah, so they're, you know, you're plotting down points and it's sort of interpolating between that stuff. Yeah, hard to say. All right, hi Grammar. Well, glad you're in, but it's probably boring anyway, so don't worry about it. Yeah, I mean, at this point, I'm literally going through like a deprecated manual. So, um, revolving surface. With the Revolve surface tool, a curve is rotated about an axis to create a surface. The user can define the axis of revolution. That could be useful. Add a surface. Maybe, maybe not what we want. Wow, that looks amazing. All right, so this is more sculpting. Lofting curves to create a surface. Let's, yeah, not quite. Subdivide surfaces, okay. Where are no longer what we want. But this could be good. Seeing some Yeah, so I guess one of the things to speak to, I don't think I've ever shown it. I guess I have to graph editor. Look up some images. Yeah. So basically, this is how the animation data, or rather, this is the format in which the stage data is saved as. Right? Because like if you're using something like Maya, it's an animation tool, which is really just to say that, for the properties of a 3D surface, whether that be like a vertex or something, you have like an XYZ coordinate, you have, the orientation of that thing, the scale of that thing. And then to animate it, you would use like a tool, like a graph editor, which is to say, like over time, move the position or change the rotation or whatnot. But internally, I think on sort of Maya's side, it's like the same thing, right? Like it's the same thing to say like a spline is really just like an initial position that over time, based on where that curve is going, you're changing the position and the orientation as it goes along that, and you can change the scale and all that stuff. And so the stage data, which I could actually go and like pull up for a second. Stage data, well, this is the course. There's a bunch of things going on. If we go and look specifically at we could look at like a series of transforms that exist to basically say like where's the root node of some part of that spline. Go to that. And then there's this whole topology parameter thing, which is what I'm calling it. Basically it's like these are like each one of these things, right? There's 9 of these. Each one of these things is an X and a Y and a Z for position, rotation, and scale. Right? Like that's like this, as much as this doesn't really make any sense probably to most of you. This is the stage data. And that is really just like the code representation of this. And we know that, and I guess I'll go back to code for a second. Right, so each one of these things, right? So those are arrays, and each array is in ease mode, what's known as a time. So like, is it at the start or the end of that interpolation, or somewhere in between? Value is what the actual thing is, and then there's like a tangent in and out. So if you notice, like on these things over here, like for any individual point, there's like these little, I don't know if they ever show the handle. There's like a little, oh, great, that's just a video. Can I just like open image in new tab? Yeah. So in here, this is very JPEG, but you'll see that, or at least hopefully you'll see like there's a purple line. Those are the tangents. So you can, I could just do this in Unity. Let's add a tab for animation. Right, so I wonder, am I still, I don't think I'm doing that, but animation flip. Cool. So this is something I was working on before, but basically, like, this is a test of me actually bringing in like the animation data from GX into a format that I can then use in Unity. So these are the keyframes, which is to say, like, these set values at specific points in time. And then the curves sheet, which if I zoom out a bit, this shows like the actual, so this is rotation. So it's like this shows the rotation at the start, and as time goes by, like on the left here, like these are values like minus 180 degrees and 180 degrees. And over time, right, like that's actually changing the rotation. The thing about it is, can't really zoom in too much. So let's grab this one. You'll see that there's like these little handles that, like, if I move the handles, it changes how the animation flows through that key frame. And there's stuff that you can do, right? So right now we have like free smooth, so I can do whatever. I can do auto, so it figures out like the best sort of, well, not the best value. It kind of finds the average between those two and does that. I can actually do broken, right? So then I can actually, like, those two handles are like independent of each other. So the thing about that is, like, for all of this stuff, that's kind of how that works. Hello, Hylas. Glad you could make it. Yeah, I'm trying to do like more earlier in the day now that I have time. But yeah, so right, like this is kind of what we're dealing with here. And so part of figuring out animation isn't just for animation, it's also for like the actual track. And so that's why stuff like this is sort of good to like just go and see, right? Like to see, you know, like in Maya, how does that work, right? So they have like the different translates. I know that, I forget where, but I know that somewhere in the code there's actually even, oh right, so it's for the animation data itself, like the actual animation of objects that like they move in the scene. There's 11 different kinds of animation. So there's 3 for position, rotation, and scale, right? Because that's X, Y, Z. One that seems to be unused unless I'm missing something. And one other actually seems to be lights. So light sources such as, I think, like green plant, when you go through those, like, I don't say purple tunnels, but when you go through like one of those buildings and they got like the purple lamp things on the side, I think that's where those things are attached to. They actually animate in some way. And then everything else is like shader tricks and stuff like that. But that's why it's good to, right, figure this stuff out with the documentation. They're animating a ball. Yeah, tangents, right? So those, again, like that line that you can move, those are the tangents. Right, so again, right, you can break tangents so they don't have to be dependent. Change timing of an attribute. Fine tuning. I love that beyond the lesson. Okay, let's. Those are these things. What do we have for this one? Yeah. Um, yeah, smooth skinning. Yeah, so I mean there's so much stuff. Like personally, I'm not super interested in actually figuring out all of the data for like characters in the game. But this is kind of how that would be. Like there's a bone structure, the vertices are weighted, there's transforms and all these things related to this stuff. Um, but that's why like a lot of those um, objects are weird, I guess, in the game. Like if you've ever poked around at the data, like just opening files and stuff, I'm sure you'll realize that like the characters are positioned weird and other things by default. It's because of that. Like the sand snake and other stuff uh, uses stuff like that too. So. Uh, this curve. Let's here. Let's put in those FC. What is FC? Oh, great. It's gonna bring that up. My 3D. No, that's not showing much of anything. Maybe nerve control? See what the modern stuff is. Okay, CV is control vertice. Yeah, this is more like it. Okay. Right, like this, this looks like a tube. And the following figure and object smoothness is changed from default medium quality wireframe hull. Curve on live object. Well, that's not it. I guess one thing I'll ask, is anyone like familiar with Blender or any other 3D software, and have any of you actually made like paths? Um, that could be useful. Uh, if I do curves, what do I get? Cool. Create 3D objects and curves. Right, create surfaces. Looks like you got some options. Yada yada. Wow, I feel like they've had that forever. If that was in their old stuff there. All right, yeah. I mean, hey, that'll be something for all of us to figure out then. Um, yeah, it would have been like 5 years ago. I had a course related to that, but that was never the main focus of the study. So, um, I know enough but I'm no expert. Let's see. Snap to grid, curve points, view plane, center of geometry. No, this is literally just saying like here are the tools. It's not super useful. Yeah, I think it's just one of those things of like, here, let's just open Blender. It's just one of those things like, once you know the right words, it'll be easy to find stuff. I don't want to sculpt. General, I guess, is fine. Transform, annotate. You can add objects. Oh man, I haven't used this in forever. Modeling, scripting, oh, sculpting. Yeah, well, no. Look, like, hey, right, we can add a keyframe. Where are these frames being added? So that would be really useful. Interpolation mode. That's pretty good to know. Constant linear busy. The reason I mentioned that is going back to this for a moment. The ease modes, there's 1, 2, and 3, and I know that some people were mentioning, or rather, the Super Monkey Ball community has it as like a constant linear and something else, and that something else might also be, right, these 3 types. Again, because I'm assuming it's the same sort of for Maya. Yeah, going through chat, Chemical might know. Yeah, that's a good point. At least, again, at least for terminology, right? Like once I can start looking for the right thing, then things start getting easier. Yeah, how is like that again, so that's the idea. It's less that I want to know exactly how to do it, and more that I want to know where those parameters sort of are within like an authoring context. Again, so if I go back to this, right, like I know that this is like the XYZ for like the transform. And so this actually, tells us where things are placed in the scene. It's not that easy though. Like there's other stuff in between. And I'm still missing some other data to kind of really figure it out. There's like this weird, what I've learned today is this is weird. It's like this weird extra bit. Here actually, I can show the weird extra bit in action. So in the spreadsheet here, if we sort by this, like this is like the extra data that, let's see, let me actually go and count the number of cells that we have here. Yeah, it's 152. So think of it this way. There's 152 individual like pieces of a course that use this data, but that's pretty insignificant if you think about the fact that for, this is both AX and GX combined, that there's 7,500 of these things. So 150 really is sort of nothing. And so part of it is figuring out well, for one, what this other data is. I've done some like analysis. A lot of these seem to be like some rotation value, right? Because you can kind of tell, it smells of rotations when you hit like 90, 180, and so on, right? You can kind of see that. But it's strange where this fits in sort of like the larger picture, because there's that, and then there's like this other data. And yeah, and so part of it really is just like, there's a bunch of different things. The more I think about it, the more I'm like, oh, well, I guess I should start visualizing it. Yeah, because like I think that's like the main thing. Um, yeah, because there's just really weird stuff. And this is, I think, where like the importance of knowing the tool is really helpful. Because so like one thing to keep in mind is like there's this thing that's going on. Let me answer the table. So if you take like, let me just highlight the first course. This is the first, well, I guess this is, yeah, it's the first course. The thing about it is technically there's only 6. Like, if you look at the data, there's like 6 of these things. But that's not true. We in fact have, well, how many do we have here? We have 12. I actually just thought of something else, and I need to go make sure I'm not, no, it should be correct. Because I'm using the address. Okay. Right, like technically there's 6 of these things, but in fact there's actually 12. Because for some of these, such as like the third and the 5th segment, it's like there's nesting going on. So it's like, I guess I would assume it's the same thing with Blender, right? Like, so you have a cube here, right? And then if I went to the cube, there's like a material or whatever. But under the cube, can I create an object? Here, let's go to modeling, layout. Okay, I'm gonna add a cube, right? I'm gonna, got a cube. And I could, probably, yes, maybe. Can I select hierarchy, delete hierarchy? Man, I'm so used to like different workflows. There's got to be a way. And okay, Control P, parent. Okay, well. Yanni dog. Well, gonna go to Unity for this, because I know how to do this way easier here. Right, so we have this stuff. If I made a cube, let's just move it over here. Let's zoom in. Right, so here's a tiny cube. The stage is giant next to it. So we have a cube, and then we can create like another cube, and this is a child of the first one, right? So for any of you familiar with 3D, right? If I start rotating this stuff, right? If I rotate the parent, the child goes with it. If I scale the parent, the child is sort of scaling with that. And so the thing that I know I need to figure out is that the way this data is working, I have a hard time thinking of how exactly this works. But so again, you're in Maya or something. You draw a spline, you draw a path, and then the curve is based off of that. That makes sense. but there are certain points along that curve that has a child, and then that child has a child, and then that child has a child, and that child has two children, and that's the end of it. And so that's really confusing, and that's kind of what's going on here, is this is technically one point that has 5 different data points tied to it. And right, like there's weird stuff going on, like, you know, the scale of the two parents are 1, the scale of the, I guess, like the third child is 160/60, and then the scale of the last two children is like 0.3011. And so again, like I have a hard time seeing where that works. Okay. Let's do this. We grab these two. Let's see. Do that. Well, well, I'm not quite parsing that. But that's not important at the moment, I guess. Um, yeah. So anyway, like that's kind of the one of the things that is weird. The hierarchy that eventually just kind of does whatever. And again, like this isn't even like a complicated course. This is stage 1, right? Like um this is Mute City Twist Road, and there's a hierarchy at some point of 5 different objects. So like the root object, 2 children, and then the final 2 children that are underneath that one. And so, yeah. Well, I guess that'll be something. Well, I guess I'll make a quick call. If anyone figures out a name for some of this stuff, um, hmm, yeah, well that does sound like Blender. Um, I'll have a look at that in a bit. Um, yeah, but that's the main thing right now. I think that's the main sticking point. Yeah, but part of me is considering hunting down a version of like Maya 4 and like building a Windows XP machine, and actually just having a see at that. That might be useful. Interesting. Um, I want to say go on slash also, is it like, is that a 3D modeling specific thing that there are like different ways to parent? Because yeah, because like hmm, creating a straight linear, how to create curves. Hmm. Well, I can go on in a bit. Rather, I can go look online in a bit. Blender does look like it has some information on how it does curves. Interesting. Without inverse. So here's one thing I do know, and this is from like forever ago. Sorry, anytime I'm looking in this direction, that's because that's for Chinese for me. I guess to kind of speak to this, right? I remember having a look at this data like 4 years ago, maybe it was, and I can confirm. So all of this stuff, again, it's super weird. So each point along the curve is like its own transform. So there's a position, location, or a position, rotation, and scale, and that's pretty common stuff. Um, and some of these things have children. They are in fact being transformed by their parent. So like the applying the scale and stuff does actually kind of ripple down in the appropriate way. Um, so yeah, yeah, it's weird stuff. I think at this point it might just be a matter of like, if anyone has spare time and wants to look at curves, um, by all means, go ahead. Um, so it looks like that, right? Like, yeah, let's go have a look at what Blender's saying, right? Because I know that there's like Bezier curves, which I kind of hope that's what a lot of these are, because the math isn't that difficult. NURBs seem a little bit more complex. Add an open 2D NURBS curve with 4 control points with uniform knots. Yeah, and it looks like a path adds the NURBS open 3D curve made of 5 aligned control points with endpoint knots. Yeah, pivot point. The pivot point is the point in space around which all rotation scaling and mirror transforms are centered. Yeah, I guess that's really just to say origin. Yeah, parent. This just looks like it's a list of, yeah, okay. Well, that was, yeah, so, and again, so I would think that, again, that's sort of the tooling that was used. And so, oh wow. I was looking up some information and it's like, does Blender have splines? And the answer was no, but the answer was no in 2004. And I have a suspicion we have come a bit of a ways since then. Yeah, there we go. Structure. Splines. Splines are cool. Let me throw this up. Splines are a substructure of curves and are individual elements that make curve objects. Curve objects can be composed of several different splines. Okay, great. Just like mesh objects can have different discontinuous meshes under the same object. Spline defines the shape of the curve, can be transformed by altering its control points. CP, not FC. Splines come in 3 distinct types, which are described as spline types. Different algorithm. Okay. Yeah. I'll have to. That might be something I do next. Is just um, throw together a way to visualize that. Because one thing I did today was I added the ability to make these things have a matrix. And so the math to kind of sort out what the rotation, scale, and position is for the stuff is now going to be really easy. Because this data structure is recursive, which is kind of cool and kind of annoying. So this is a let's close these up. This is like what I'm calling a track transform. We're probably going to change this name eventually because it's more like, I don't know, a spline pointer. There's probably going to be a formal word for it. But this data type, has its own data type as a possible argument, and by default, it's like, well, how many children does this transform have? By default, it's 0. But again, there's just that really strange, like, recursive pattern going on, where it kind of keeps digging into itself. Because, again, like this is why it's weird and it's taking forever. Aside from the fact that I've been busy for a while, but or like anytime you kind of look at the stuff, it's like, this object has a child, has a child. This object has a child, has a child. Right? Like, but it's not really a tree. Like I would expect a tree. Like you have a parent and then you have a number of children and then they have parameters and then those children have children and there's a number of parameters. But it's always like a linear line almost. Yeah, and the high list. Yeah, go right ahead. I'll have a look a bit once I'm done. I'm probably gonna wrap up anyway. I feel like I've just been ranting about stuff and opening spreadsheets, and that's about it. Um, but yeah, like that's the kind of thing that's weird. And there's again, some of these things have weird properties. And if we go to a course that splits, which let me pull up a list. What is a course that splits? Yeah, I could always just do the easy one, right? Cosmo Terminal 24. Right, so if we go to Cosmo Terminal, right, like we're getting some weird stuff. So like, what? Okay, so that object has 3 children, and each child has 2 things. So that's weird, right? Like, yeah, I think with a lot of this stuff, I'll just have to go visualize it. And I think I can go, and something that I was thinking about too is I'm probably going to have to improve how checkpoints are visualized. Right? Because they're they've done their course, right? But they're kind of done. I love this giant kill plane. Right? But if you look at, if we look at these things, like, yes, okay, those are checkpoints I get, but it doesn't really show us the direction they're facing or the width. And we know that those are all parameters that they have. So we could probably go and visualize that. So once we visualize this better, it should be easier to visualize the other stuff, right? And But I guess going back to one thing, this is part of the reason why, like, last year, basically all I worked on was like generating courses. Because now that we have, now that I can just put everything in the scene, um, it gets a lot easier to figure out how the data relates to the track. I guess except for this track because, you know, it's broken. Um, actually, I'm gonna go to course 5. Yeah. Line signs. Yeah, these things have like a bajillion objects. Okay. I just want to check, is that thing still here? Still off the course. Yeah, what the heck? The AX version of this course doesn't have garbage data. The one that's actually in the final release has like some garbage data. That's interesting. I was going somewhere with the comment, but yeah, I feel like my brain is done. It's not really following any logic anymore. So I think I'll leave it at that. I'll visualize some stuff. My intent, and as I do this, I think I'll probably get better at actually directing a conversation. But my intent is to do something like this weekly, kind of better than today for sure. But kind of like talking about like, hey, this is what I did in the last week and what I'm working on, which, you know, perhaps then because it's twofold, right? Like in talking it out, which is something that I don't get to really do in any other format. If you talk it out, rather if I talk it out, oftentimes there's going to be stuff that I'm going to mention, and I'm like, oh yeah, I need to do this, or I need to look at that, or in the case where I'm explaining something, right? Like part of it too is at the end of the project, for as much as the goal, you might think like the goal is to get a stage editor, and to be fair, it kind of is, right? Like that is the goal in some sense. The real goal here is not just to make a stage editor. The goal is to have documentation about the format because, you know, it's great that I can do all this stuff, but if it, if I disappear, if I mysteriously disappear next year, like, wouldn't it be great if there was just like a repository of information that talks about what the data structures in the game are and how they work, right? Because again, it's like it's easy to say like, oh yeah, that's an integer, okay, or like those are flags, okay. Well, what does it do, right? Like that's kind of one of the key things to work out. And so part of it is kind of like what I have on the right. This is very much work in progress from some of the stuff I was doing today, but right, like having stuff like that, like having the documentation is more important than having the stage editor. Because if we have proper documentation, people can actually join and help. Whereas if everything's just in my own head, that doesn't really help anyone. So anyway, I think I'll leave it at that. Thanks to anyone who decided to stick around as I basically rant. And so, yeah. Um, I'll leave it at that. The next time I'm up here, hopefully I'll have some cooler things to visualize for the track data. But yeah. All right. Well, have a great rest of your day, everyone. I guess right now I have a stream scheduled for next week, sort of 3:30 as well. We'll see about that, but yeah, I'll post any cool stuff I find in the F0 mods. Yeah, cool. Take care, everyone. Man, I also need an outro screen or something.